Support for WUWM podcasts comes from University School of Milwaukee, fulfilling a values-based mission of developing learners, fostering leaders, and preparing citizens for pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. More information at usm.org/mission.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, we'll talk about the case against Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan as her legal team considers whether to go to trial or take a plea deal. And as a part of our series about barriers to home ownership, we'll learn about the consequences of redlining.
Housing was essentially not available to communities of color, with the assumption that communities that were tend to be black or brown were less stable and less worthy of investment.
Plus, we'll examine the changing market of Christmas trees and how sellers are adapting.
So there's a lot of expansion into the entertainment realm, which then provides a whole experience for the people to come and enjoy with their families. And there's, of course, social media, so there's a lot of photo stations and things like that.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. On Wednesday morning, Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Hannah Dugan will have her last hearing before her case potentially goes to trial. Dugan is accused of helping a defendant in her courtroom to evade immigration enforcement officers. The case against Dugan has become a bit of a flashpoint in President Donald Trump's sweeping immigration crackdown. Federal prosecutors have said they're offering Dugan plea deals. Lawyers for Dugan say their client is innocent and will be going to trial next month. To find out more about what could happen next, WUWM's Mayan Silver spoke with Wisconsin criminal defense attorney Tony Cotton, who is not involved in the case.
To remind people about this case, prosecutors say Judge Dugan escorted 31-year-old Eduardo Flores Ruiz and his lawyer out of her courtroom through a back door in April after she learned that ICE agents had arrived to arrest him. Judge Dugan was indicted in May by a federal grand jury on charges of obstruction, a misdemeanor, and concealing an individual to prevent arrest, a felony. Okay, so first I just want to know, big picture, what do you think are the implications of this case?
I think the implications are more professional than anything else, because it's one of those situations that could be hard for Judge Dugan to recover from professionally. In terms of consequences in the federal court system, I haven't run her guidelines. Everything is typically, they have a guideline system of sentencing in federal court. So if she were convicted, my guess is that someone like her is going to be, it wouldn't even be a confinement situation given how low level this offense is.
Driving back a little bit to the charges obstruction and concealing an individual to prevent an arrest, what would the government need to prove to convict her?
Well, for obstructing, you have to show that you I hate to use the word, but you have to show that you obstructed law enforcement in some capacity, that you engaged in behavior that made their job more difficult. In terms of concealing a person to prevent their discovery or arrest, that's the same thing. That it's not the same charge, but it's the same concept. The government would have to prove that she acted in a knowing fashion and that she intended to conceal or prevent the immigrant from being apprehended by the authorities.
Okay, so I want to get to the jury and picking the jury in a moment, but what do you see as the strengths and weaknesses of the government's case against her?
The strength of the government's case comes from the video that demonstrates exactly what she did in the hallway. It's a very clear video. You can see exactly what Judge Dugan did. The difficulty the government is going to have is getting a jury, if we think about that, getting a jury to get inside Judge Dugan's head and reach a conclusion about what her intent was. It's always difficult to get, as a prosecutor, it's always difficult to get a jury to understand what a defendant's intent is if they haven't said it.
And how does intent play into the conviction of her?
Because a person has to intend to obstruct the police or law enforcement, and in one of the elements of the crime for the other count is that she has to intend to conceal a person from arrest. So her intent is what the entire case will come down to.
And Dugan has argued that she has done nothing wrong, she did nothing wrong, and that she has complete authority over movement in her courtroom. What do you see as the strengths and weaknesses of her case?
I think she has another very strong argument that I've seen her attorneys try to advance, which is a public authority argument, essentially that Judge Dugan was following Chief Judge orders on, and I don't know if it's true or not that there was such an order, but essentially she's been claiming that what she was doing was simply following the protocol that had been set forth by the judiciary in Milwaukee County.
And how would that play into defending herself?
Yeah, because if she is, because it goes right to the heart of the intent. If what she was doing was explaining to the agents that there's a different protocol that needs to be followed, and she was permitting the immigrant to use a different door, not to obstruct the police, but to reduce the confrontation in the courtroom, then it would bear on what her intent was. So I think that's why she's trying to advance that argument, is to say, hey, look, there was some sort of directive that was in place. Judges were told A, B, and C. I was simply approaching these agents to explain to them that there's a different way of going about this. My goal here was not to prevent the immigrant from being apprehended.
Former Wisconsin Attorney General and State Supreme Court candidate Brad Schimmel was recently appointed as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. That's who's prosecuting the case against Dugan. Do you think he's likely taking orders from top officials at the U.S. Department of Justice on how to handle negotiations in this case, and how could that impact a possible resolution?
That's a really, really fascinating question that I just don't know the answer to. I've never been a prosecutor. Obviously, U.S. attorneys on a local level they act at the will of the president. They're appointed that way. So certainly to some degree, there are marching orders that are always given from higher up. In a case like this, there will be, I have no doubt, close attention paid to it by Mr. Schimmel's supervisors within the Department of Justice. But I couldn't tell you what they've said to him or how they're influencing him.
And since you're not a party to this case, you don't know what exactly the government is offering Judge Dugan to plead guilty. But can you explain how plea negotiations work in federal court? Yeah,
so in federal court is a lot different than state court, because in federal court there's a lot more supervisory approval that has to happen. State court, you can negotiate a deal oftentimes on the spot with whoever's handling the case. In federal court, it's much more formal. There's probably memos going back and forth. There's probably detailed discussions about what would happen at trial on both sides. And ultimately, any resolution that is reached is going to have to go probably to the upper echelons of the Department of Justice, if not Trump himself, before any agreement is reached in this case. It wouldn't surprise me if such a thing had to be signed off on by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General herself, or even Trump.
And this case, of course, has already been very political. Democrats have accused the Trump administration of trying to make an example of Dugan. FBI Director Kash Patel posted a photo on X of Dugan being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. And the U.S. Department of Homeland Security posted on X that Dugan has taken the term, quote, activist judge to a whole new meaning. How could this impact the process of finding an impartial jury?
So it's always difficult to find an impartial jury on any case. I can speak from experience, having handled any number of high-profile cases, that those cases in particular become even harder. So I think I think the attention that this case has generated will make it difficult. I think the posts you describe by people on the prosecution side are inappropriate. I think that's very rare for me. In fact, it's usually the reverse. It's usually the defense that I see in other cases making comments publicly. 99% of the time, the prosecution is totally tight-lipped, ironclad silence. Here it's been sort of the opposite. The prosecutors have been quiet, but the government officials haven't, and that is going to taint the jury pool for sure.
And so in the same way that you described how plea negotiations work in federal court, how does picking a jury work in federal court?
They're going to bring in 50, 60, 70 people. Those people are going to be marched into the courtroom and sat down. Their judge is going to ask them questions, and the lawyers will have an opportunity to explore through the judge by submitting questions to the judge about people's bias. So if someone has heard about the case, they might be biased. If they are a hardcore Kamala supporter or Trump supporter, they might be biased in some way. So that'll be explored with the jurors in order to try to reduce the number of people sitting on the jury who have strong feelings about the case.
In order to convict or acquit Dugan, you need a unanimous jury. That's all 12 jurors. Do you anticipate that, or do you think that there could ever be a hung jury in this circumstance?
This won't be a case of a hung jury, in my opinion. I mean, obviously any case could be, but I don't see that happening here. I think this is one where they're going to strike a plea deal and plead it out. But if they don't, I think you're just going to have the jurors being able to make a decision here with the evidence that they're presented with. It doesn't appear to be a complicated case where I could see the jurors having a lot of doubt about what happened.
So Wednesday is going to be the final pretrial in the case. Until when do you think the parties could strike a plea deal?
They could strike a plea deal up to the morning of trial, and that does sometimes happen even in federal court. I think more likely than not, this is not going to be like a last minute, day of trial negotiation. This is one where I think you'll have an idea by the final pretrial if it's going to settle.
Interesting. Anything else you're going to be watching for if this case goes to trial on December 15th?
Yeah, I mean, if it goes to trial, I'm really curious how long it'll last. I can't imagine there's a lot of witnesses on either side. It seems to me like a sort of a 2-day trial or maybe a 3-day trial. But, there's video of what took place. Judge Dugan would presumably testify about what her intent was. I think a trial is fraught with risk for her, and I just think it's very, very unlikely she's going to take that plunge. That, in my opinion.
Interesting. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it does go to trial. Do you think that it's going to send a message one way or the other if the jury acquits her or if the jury convicts her? Yeah,
it'll have a profound message one way or the other. And I think there's partisans on both sides who don't care one bit about Judge Dugan, and they simply want the matter to go to trial to serve their own political agendas. But an acquittal would obviously send the message that this was very heavy-handed. A conviction would be disastrous for Judge Dugan, because one thing your listeners may not know is in the federal system, if you are convicted at trial, you lose credit for acceptance of responsibility, and there is a specific sentence enhancement, an increase that is applicable in the guidelines. So a person gets a harsher sentence if they go to trial and lose than if they take a plea deal.
At the same time, you were indicating that you doubt that confinement would necessarily be a component of a sentence if she was to be convicted.
I think if she takes a plea deal, there isn't any scenario where she does even 1 day in jail, because her behavior does not look like the type of behavior where we would typically expect to see someone confined. It's very isolated, very discreet. She has no criminal record. She's a respected judge. To me, the risk here, this isn't like a drug distribution case or a gun case where there's no question the person will do some time. This is one where I think the confinement, if she takes a plea deal, is certainly not going to be anything. If she's convicted at trial, though, that could be different, because if she testifies and they find that she testified falsely and she doesn't get credit for acceptance of responsibility, then it makes the situation a lot worse. So I would revise what I said. I think if she's convicted at trial, certainly the outcome could be very bad for her.
All right, Attorney Tony Cotton, thanks for talking to us about this case.
All right, thanks, Mayan.
That was WUWM's Mayan Silver speaking with criminal defense attorney Tony Cotton. If Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan does go to trial, it's scheduled to start December 15th. It's difficult for many people to buy a home in Milwaukee, even if they do have a stable job. WUWM is examining the systemic problems that contribute to this challenge and some potential solutions in our series called Seeking Solutions: Keys to Homeownership. Today, we'll look at how redlining has created barriers to homeownership for people of color. Redlining was a discriminatory practice that labeled homes in Black and brown communities as too risky for loans. WUWM's Eddie Morales spoke with Dr. Kirk Harris. Harris is a UW-Milwaukee professor and director of the Center for Equity Practice and Planning Justice.
So, in order to understand redlining, I think we have to start with the history of America. And that history is deeply embedded in the racialized notions of placemaking, meaning that from chattel slavery to the existence and construction of Jim Crow to the development of segregation that was supported vis-a-vis the separate but equal doctrine, all of which have led to what we understand is a kind of a hyper segregated America. But redlining emerged directly from governmental practices. Early in the part of the 20th century, we had public housing, and public housing was actually for white folks. It was provided an alternative so that those individuals could be stabilized from a housing perspective and then move to other forms of housing. That housing, at its inception, public housing as we knew it from its inception, was segregated. But over the course of time, particularly as we exited the Second World War, there was an effort by government to recognize the shortage of housing that existed for returning members from the armed services. And part of that effort to support that was to accelerate the development of housing. Prior to that, it's interesting that most folks could not afford housing because typically, in order for you to afford a house, you had to put down a huge down payment, and the mortgage on the house had to be paid off very quickly in a short period. And it really created a constraint for opportunities for housing for the average American.
How did other factors play a role, like housing policies and banks?
Government stepped in and said, we're going to guarantee these loans that are issued by banks so that the average American can now afford a home with a small down payment. And that actually accelerated the development of what we now know as suburbanized housing, because what it did was it provided opportunities for demand for housing at a much higher rate, and it provided the expansion of single family ownership by the average American. And when I say the average American, the average white American, because the initial efforts in this approach did not support for mortgages to areas that were for Black buyers or buyers of color. And the government created Homeowners Loan Corporation, which essentially was the body that served as the guarantor of these loans and constructed the policies which restricted the availability of loans based on race. And the assumption was that where you had communities that were potentially racially integrated or had Black folks in it, it created a decline in the property values and created uncertainty as to the stability of said investment, which made those investments from the argument from the bank vantage point not secure investments. And as such, governmental policy then sought to ensure that housing was essentially not available to communities of color, with the assumption that was not built on any research or any evaluative study that communities that were tend to be Black or brown were less stable and less worthy of investment. And so what the strategy was to essentially, through these practices, create areas that were redlined, those areas in which the investment was considered to be risky, right? In which case, those areas were not subject to support by banks. So at the earlier part of the 20th century, we had this interesting phenomena of housing opportunity and housing development by government for essentially the white population that excluded the Black population. And what was interesting about that is that not only the FHA, was a supplemental governmental authority to run these programs, along with the VA, which also provided supports for housing, both of which were exclusionary in that regard. And so redlining is responsible not only for the underdevelopment of Black community in terms of wealth, but it also segregated those communities because those communities were then deprived of resources. They were deprived of investment. And many of those areas that were deprived of those investments then in the early part of the 20th century, guess what? They're the same communities that are deprived of investments today. So what we essentially have is the remnants of that system has created a systemic embedded disadvantage that has defined a large portion of our urban environments as racially segregated. And as such, redlining is the kind of the culprit for that in the practices of governmental policy, reinforced, by the way, by private bank practices as well.
You're listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. I'm Eddie Morales speaking with Dr. Kirk Harris about redlining. Can you talk a little bit more about how zoning played a role?
Single family lots with homes sitting on single family lots are a lot more expensive. And so large lot zoning is often the mechanism via economic exclusion, which is intimately linked to racial exclusion that has fostered this problem. Also, racial covenants. Can't forget the notion of racial covenants, which was the history of America. And in fact, in Milwaukee, Ann Bonds and Derek Hadley have been doing a lot of really good work on identifying the history of racial covenants, which are essentially agreements, contractual agreements that restrict the sale of land based on race. And you'll find that in Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, those covenants proliferate. They're no longer enforceable, but they still actually exist on the deeds of homes that were previously under those contractual relationships. And now the remnants of all of that continually gets replicated because we have not addressed the uneven distribution of opportunity at the urban level to essentially deconstruct these problems.
Can you touch on what redlining looked like specifically in Milwaukee and which neighborhoods and groups of people were most affected?
Well, people that are most affected by redlining in Milwaukee and other places typically are Black communities. And you can look at any community. I mean, as you know, Milwaukee is one of the most highly segregated cities in the country. And you can look at the communities in which many Black communities exist, and you can see the stark segregation that exists between them and their peer white communities. And so I think pick a community that's Black in Milwaukee, it's segregated. So, and I think that history is just endemic because of the structural challenges that exist that undergird how that racial segregation kind of initiated and how it continues to maintain itself over time.
Is there anything that I haven't asked or that we haven't talked about so far that you feel like would be important to include?
As a planner, I always like to talk about solutions and how to address some of these larger structural issues. And I think one of the ways to begin to address this racialized placemaking and the impacts that uneven distribution of opportunities has created as a function of racial segregation, I've been doing a lot of discussion and thinking about what we call community wealth building. For example, talking about living wages and the opportunities to move people into opportunities so that they can actually support themselves, their families, have discretionary income to maybe even save to buy a home. So thinking about the role that governmental policy and economic development can play in creating better and more secure living wage jobs is a really important element to kind of advancing the opportunities and breaking the cycle that we see in segregated communities. The other is there's an affordability crisis in many cities, including Milwaukee. People can't afford the housing. And why can't they afford the housing? Because a lot of the land that exists that is vacant is being subject to speculation. In Milwaukee, for example, it's being gobbled up by, and homes are being gobbled up by external out-of-town investors. And that has, for example, pushed up rents and other things artificially. And it has, in some of the economic development practices that have been attended to that, have also created pressures for displacement and gentrification. So how can we solve that problem? One of the things that we can do is we can give communities more control over land. I've been having some conversations about the role that land trusts can play in giving communities much more control over the land that exists in their community, having them to be the arbiters of the ways in which that land is used and mitigating this speculation, which often leads to the displacement that vulnerable communities experience.
That was Dr. Kirk Harris, Director of the Center for Equity Practice and Planning Justice at UW-Milwaukee. Harris spoke with WUWM's Eddie Morales. This interview is part of our Seeking Solutions Keys to Homeownership series. Support for the series comes from presenting sponsor, Educators Credit Union. You can find all of our coverage at wuwm.com/housing. And tune in tomorrow for our next story about solutions to increase homeownership. Did you know you can listen to Lake Effect as a podcast? Search for Lake Effect wherever you get your podcast to download and listen on demand. Later on in the show, we'll debrief on some new Milwaukee area restaurants and ones that are closing. Ahead of that, we'll talk about the economic factors behind your family's Christmas tree. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. With the holidays around the corner, many Wisconsinites are purchasing a Christmas tree. But fewer trees are being grown. Statewide Christmas tree harvests have dipped 60% in the last 20 years. This rate of decline in Wisconsin is about double the national average. Possible reasons include the popularity of artificial trees, a dip in production after the Great Recession, and weather-related setbacks. Stephen Potter is a freelance reporter for Milwaukee Magazine. In this month's issue, he wrote about how Wisconsin's Christmas tree suppliers are adjusting. He spoke about it with Lake Effect's Sam Woods.
Today, Wisconsin is still a big Christmas tree supplier, but how has that business model changed in recent years?
Sure. Like other things, businesses in agriculture need to continue to add on to attract customers. And there's this thing called agri-entertainment going on right now where the Christmas tree producers want to stay in competition and do things that their competition isn't doing. And so they've begun to add on different features and different entertainment things, such as, a lot of Christmas tree farms in Wisconsin have sleigh rides, or they'll have Santa come out. Some even have reindeer. They might have s'mores that you can kind of make and do all that. They're selling hot chocolate. They're selling other items. So there's a lot of expansion into the entertainment realm, which then provides a whole experience for the people to come and enjoy with their families. And there's, of course, social media. So there's a lot of photo stations and things like that. So it's a really expansive entertainment area now for some of the Christmas tree producers.
Yeah. When I think of Christmas trees and the Christmas tree markets, the elephant in the room is the artificial trees, where technology around artificial trees, they're a lot more realistic than they used to be and more popular. So is this kind of agri-entertainment approach the way Wisconsin Christmas tree businesses are trying to sell, as like not only do you get a tree, but you get a memory?
Yeah, absolutely. These are ways to draw in the customers and offer them something other than just the tree, which is what was traditionally offered. Is now you have this whole experience. You're creating these memories for families, for kids. Going out and getting a Christmas tree is something you tend to do with family or friends.
So in your piece, you profile one of these kind of agri-entertainment approaches to the Christmas tree business. But there's another kind of stripped-down approach. Can you talk about that?
Sure. It seems that there's two ways that Christmas tree producers are going these days. It's the full-on agri-entertainment with the sleigh rides and the Santa and the photos and all of that, or bare bones, where you just have the trees, you get handed a saw, and you go out and you cut it down and you take it home. And that seems like the two approaches which are working for the tree producers in Wisconsin.
In your reporting, did you come across any reasons why a particular business might gravitate to the agri-entertainment versus that kind of stripped down bare bones, no roof, porta potty kind of approach?
Yeah, I think that for folks that do lean into the agri-entertainment, they do love to see the smiles on the people's faces. They do it for the enjoyment, for providing that memory and that fun and that experience and that tradition for people. But it is a lot of work, right? They've got to arrange all of the staff. They've got to, call up a Santa and get him there and do all of that. And so that is a lot of work. But then the bare bones folks, they are catering to those people who maybe don't have enough time or other things going on, and they just want to get out there, get a tree, still want to have the experience of getting a tree, but not have to pay also for all the frills and everything else, because so then they can offer a cheaper tree.
When we were thinking of the Christmas tree market as a whole, would you describe this business as lucrative?
It's tough to say. I think the agri-entertainment, the tree producers that are out there doing a lot of things and selling a lot of things are doing pretty well because they keep building on it. But there has been a decline in business, certainly over the years, to where there are just not as many Christmas tree producers in the state for a number of reasons.
Can you get into those reasons?
Sure. I did talk with the folks from the Wisconsin Christmas Tree Producers Association, and over the years they've told me a couple different things. One reason that there are fewer Christmas tree growers in Wisconsin is that some folks just don't want to take on that business from their parents. It's a lot of work. It's a long game. Christmas trees take years to grow. So that's not something they're interested in being. They're not interested in being Christmas tree farmers, so they sell the land or change maybe to a different agriculture product. And the other reason is, like as you mentioned earlier, there was the artificial or fake tree market. You know, a lot of those trees are pretty good now. It's maybe a lot less headache than going out and getting a tree from a lot or from a farm when you can just pull it out of the basement. And so that has had a big impact on the Christmas tree growers market. And to that point, there has been a decline in business and a number of harvested trees. Like it's gone down 60% over the last 20 years in Wisconsin, to where about 600,000 trees are now harvested per year, according to the USDA. Here in Wisconsin, they've gone down 60%. Nationally, they've gone down about 30%. And there's also been a dip in the number of Christmas tree growers in the state from around 900 to now 600.
You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Sam Woods, speaking with Stephen Potter, who wrote an article in this month's Milwaukee Magazine about the business of Christmas trees. And Stephen, you were just mentioning that Wisconsin, especially getting hit hard here, it seems, in the last 20 years or so. You mentioned one of those factors being that young people kind of reluctant to get into this business. I also came across a couple articles talking about how the 2008 recession led to a shortage in Christmas trees 8 years later. Are there other notable shocks to this market that are at play here that explain this decline?
Sure. I mean, weather is always a problem with agriculture, right? So if you have a bad weather year, if it's very dry, or you have an overgrowth of invasive species or something that can affect the product that you're growing, that can certainly impact it. It's not immediate impact because, like we've been saying, it takes years to grow a Christmas tree. It takes around a decade to grow a full Christmas tree. So if you have a problem with weather on year 2, you're not going to really feel that for a few years, but then you are going to feel it and you're going to take a dip and a hit there. Or if your farm is struggling, or if you have other financial needs that's pulling your finances elsewhere, you may not be able to get out and to simply plant as many trees, and you may not see that hit immediately, but then down the line in the next few years, you will. So it's a pretty long game. So a number of factors can come in and mess things up for folks.
Yeah, that's one thing as a non-tree producer, right? It can be easy to forget that, this isn't like growing a tomato plant in your backyard where it's just, you plant it in April and harvest it in the fall. This is, I plant this for 8 to 10 years down the line.
Right. It's really, and how much space do you have, and is the soil gonna give you what you need for it, and are you going to be able to get out there and actually trim the tree properly, because they don't grow in that nice triangle. You have to get out there and shear it, and so there's a lot of factors, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah. So this may be a big question, but I'll ask you to look into your crystal ball and tell us what you think the future holds.
I do wonder if we'll go to kind of two extremes. I think the agri-entertainment thing is successful for those folks who can still do it and provide Santa and the sleigh rides and all of that. And I think that there is potential for growth for that. That was a real big thing during the early years of the pandemic because people could be outside and they could do something fun together, but still separate. So I do see some potential and some growth and some stability there for those who can do it and who are doing it. But then I also see the convenience and the ease and the just simplicity of being able to pull an artificial tree out of a box and going with it there. And then once you have an artificial tree, it's easier to keep putting up that artificial tree. I don't think folks go back from having an artificial tree once they get it. So that's kind of where that's at.
Stephen Potter is a freelance reporter for Milwaukee Magazine, and you can find his article on the state of Wisconsin's Christmas tree market in this month's issue. Potter joined Lake Effect's Sam Woods. Coming up, we'll explore some new restaurants opening in Milwaukee and look back on some old favorites that have recently closed. Keep listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. This is Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. This holiday season, many of us are looking for things to do with the family, including trying out some new restaurants. And if you're looking for a great new place to try, Lori Frederick has you covered. Frederick is the dining editor for On Milwaukee, and she regularly joins us to talk about new Milwaukee area restaurants and reminisce about old favorites that have recently closed. She joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers to share more.
There are a lot of great new restaurants that have opened up in the Milwaukee area, but of course we are saying goodbye to a number of old favorites. I think a lot of people are sad to see this first one go, Martino's Chicago-style hot dogs.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time to say goodbye. They won't be closing until December, but they've been around for a good long time, since 1977. Martino's began when Mary Anderson, who is a Chicago native, came to Milwaukee, and she was really just longing to bring Milwaukeeans a taste of home, which was Chicago. And so she started Martino's as a seasonal stand where she sold Chicago-style food items. It got success, and when that happened, it was demolished in 1983 and rebuilt as a new structure in its place, which is what you would know now. By 2000, Mary passed the business along to her son, TJ, and his wife, Kathy, and basically they made it possible for the business to carry on as long as it did. But they announced a few weeks ago that they would be closing the business, with its last day being December 19th. So everybody has a few weeks left to go and grab their Chicago dogs and whatever things are good memories from Martino's.
Whichever Chicago delicacy is your choice.
Yes.
Now, this next one we're going to talk about, I was surprised to hear about this. AJ Bombers is closing.
Yeah, I think it hit me as a surprise at first because it has been such an incredible success story and maybe a surprising one for Milwaukee. It's just gotten so much great publicity, I mean, with the burger wars and over social media. But I think the neighborhood has changed. You know, I think Water Street is a different place than it was when AJ Bombers opened. I also think with the changing of hands from Hospitality Democracy and Joe Sorge to Benson's restaurant group, they had to look at their, what was doing well. There's so many more burgers in the city now, but there's definitely a lot of nostalgia there.
Yeah. Not too far away, there's another closing. Ouzo Cafe, this is a Greek spot right downtown. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, they announced a few weeks ago that they would be closing. And this has been a spot that has been just really reliable for Greek staples. For a long time, they've been a popular spot for late night. I think the closing was kind of a surprise, but I think there's been an offer on this space and something is moving in. So it was family owned, and it's been a hard time for restaurants. And I think, when you've been in a space for a while and you get a good offer, sometimes it's time. It's time to go. So,
yeah. Now we are heading pretty far south in the city to a place that I used to really love, especially when I lived in Bayview, Saucy Swine.
Saucy Swine, they've been operating out of Red Bar for 13 years, which is a fairly long time. And they announced a number of weeks ago that they were going to be taking a break from usual operations. So they won't be operating on a daily basis out of Saucy Swine. They will be continuing to operate their catering business during the summer months. In this particular case, it's a matter of preserving time with family. When I talked to him on the phone, right away he said, I've just missed a lot of time with my family. He said, I don't know what the future looks like, and the restaurant may come back, but for right now, I think it's one of those things where he needs a break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of great new restaurants that have either recently opened or are about to open here in Milwaukee. One that I know a lot of people are excited about, especially if you love German cuisine and German street food. I think it's pronounced doner kebab.
Doner kebab. Germany is wild about doner kebabs. Currywurst used to be the big street food in Germany. And in recent years, the doner kebab has completely swept the currywurst away. The family, Ray and Elma Romick, who own this new shop, which is simply named Doner Kebab. Ray is from Germany. Elma was born in Bosnia, but also raised in Germany. Ray studied culinary in Germany and always wanted to own his own doner kebab stand. His family came over when he was probably 18 years old, and they landed in Hartford, Wisconsin, which is where he stayed. They started their first doner kebab in Hartford, which opened in February of 2023. Word traveled fast via social media, and they had people traveling from Chicago, Oshkosh, various different places to get the doner kebabs that they were serving. A lot of the people were coming to Hartford from Milwaukee. So they decided about 2 years in that they should put a second location in the Milwaukee area and found one in the River Glen Shopping Center. They opened and have been bombarded. They've been closed a couple of days because they've run out of food. So people are very, very excited about the doner kebab.
Now, for listeners who might not know what a doner kebab is, how would you describe it?
It's a sandwich. In the case of the Romicks, they make their own bread, which is a fluffy flatbread that they slice open. You have a choice of steak or chicken that has been hand-sliced. The steak is a cut from the neck of the cow that's been sliced and hand-seasoned with Ray's recipe and then cooked on a vertical rotisserie. So a doner kebab comes from the Turkish, who brought their recipe for vertically roasted meat to Germany in the 1960s when they came as guest workers. And the Germans quickly decided they loved the doner kebab. It just caught on as a street food.
The next restaurant we're going to talk about is, I feel similar in some ways in that we haven't actually had one of these restaurants in Milwaukee for a minute, despite us having so many Polish communities here in Milwaukee. We didn't really have a restaurant, but that's changed.
Yeah, it's been 4 years since we've last had a Polish restaurant in Milwaukee. Violetta's Polish Kitchen has now come on the scene as of October. And Adam and Violetta Bartozak, who also own Violetta's Polish Deli, opened the restaurant. Originally, they were looking to open a restaurant in South Milwaukee, but their plans fell through there. And now the restaurant is in an old Applebee's in Oak Creek. They're going to serve a lot of the things that people could buy at the deli, including their soups. A lot of people have asked me if they're going to serve dill pickle soup, and they are serving that on rotation as a soup special of the day. They're also serving really traditional Polish fare, pierogi, pork cutlets, Polish sausage, goulash, stuffed cabbage, and I'm sure a bunch of other things that they will add to the menu kind of as time moves on. People have been very excited about the opening. I would just encourage people to really support, the concept, because I do think people get really excited about Polish restaurants, and then the support seems to wane in terms of, how many people go to the restaurant on a regular basis. And restaurants need those regulars who eat there every day to keep them going. And so, we haven't had a Polish restaurant for 4 years. And if we want to keep this one, we probably need to give them our love.
Now, we're looking at a few restaurants that have not opened quite yet. One of these is Cassis.
Cassis?
Cassis.
This is going to be a French bistro concept from Chef Kyle Knall and his wife Megan Knall, owners of Birch, who own Birch on Pleasant. And that is the wood-fired, locally focused concept that has done very, very well. This restaurant has already gotten acclaim. It was declared Bon Appetit's. It was put on their list of must-try restaurants for 2025, and it's not even open yet. So there's been a lot of excitement. This is going to be in the 3rd Ward on the corner of Water Street and St. Paul. It's a very large space. It's right on the river. They've been doing previews of the French. It's kind of French fusion food. They've been taking classic French dishes and doing little twists, dishes made with local products as well, which is just one of the things that Kyle Knall is passionate about. They were supposed to open this fall. I don't know if they are completely on time, but I would expect this is probably one of the first and most high-profile restaurants that we will see opening soon.
The final one we're going to talk about, this is called Naughty Plates.
Yes. This is owned by Nadia Buchholz, which explains the name. But she always laughs because she said, it sounds like naughty plates. And this is operated by Nadia and her family. It's an Italian concept. Nadia grew up in the Italian restaurant industry, kind of got out of it. She got married, had children. But then after her husband passed away, she found herself looking, I think, for comfort in cooking and in making people happy. And she moved to Milwaukee at the request of one of her sons who had gone to school here. She moved here and started a food truck. And somewhere along the line, they began looking for a brick-and-mortar location. They toured Crossroads Collective. And Crossroads Collective, I think, was on the cusp of thinking about what to do next. Should we stay open? If we stay open, how will we stay open? And so they offered her a tour and said, you could move in here. And she said, this is perfect. But they've run into some delays in reconnoitering that space, which, of course, was a food hall. Yeah. And it won't be completely turned into Naughty Plates because the secret bar, Shanghai, that is kind of where you come in through the back, through Black Cat Alley, that is remaining there. In fact, that is still open right now. So they're kind of building around that. But ultimately, it's going to become a pretty big Italian restaurant. I'm crossing my fingers on this. I'm suspecting that they're building in some space for events just because they operate a catering company, and that it would be nice to have a place where they could host. But I am really hoping that people will support them. Right now, I think a lot of people really love their food. They are serving right now in the food truck alley at AmFam Field, and they've had a lot of success there. So they were supposed to open this fall, but it sounds like they're being pushed probably into early 2026, I would guess, just based on kind of what I see. That's probably what's happening.
All right. Well, we will see what the future holds. Lori, as always, thank you for joining us.
As always, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Lori Frederick is the dining editor for On Milwaukee, and she spoke with Leg Effect's Joy Powers. You can listen to their full conversation at WUWM.com. And that wraps up today's show. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take us on the go, simply download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, WUWM's Status Pending podcast brings us stories from refugees who have settled here in Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.